What's going on? Alex here, and today I'm going to be doing a review of Lacerte Tax Software. This is a professional software package that's typically used by tax preparers and CPAs to prepare all sorts of tax returns for their clients, be they individuals, corporate returns, fiduciary returns, and so forth. So this isn't really the package that you'd use if you're an individual preparing a return for yourself. You'd probably use something more like TurboTax. So if you're an up-and-coming tax preparer, this video might be helpful for you in terms of making the decision as to which software package you want to go with. If you're a current preparer, this may be helpful if you're looking to make the jump from your current tax package to a different software. And if you're neither of those and you're just curious as to why your CPA is so grumpy all the time, this video might shed some light on that as well. So before we get started, I want to make clear that this is going to be an unfiltered, unbiased review, which means that I'm not receiving any sort of compensation for this, and I myself pay full price for the product. So there's not going to be any affiliate links, promo codes, coupon codes, or anything like that. This is going to be exactly what I like and don't like about the product after using it for a number of years. So first, we're going to take a look at a brief overview of the layout of the software, kind of get a lay of the land and understanding of how it's structured and so forth. Then I'm going to outline everything I like about the software. So we're going to go through all the pros. Then we're going to focus on everything I dislike about it. So that's going to be the section where we highlight all of the flaws that I think are areas for improvement that Intuit needs to address. So with all that said, let's get started. Now, this is the first screen that you're greeted with when you open the software, and you're going to see that the navigation around Lacerte is based on tabs. So in the beginning, you have the Clients tab here, Details, Forms, Diagnostics, and so forth. So when you first open the program, you're starting off on the Clients tab. Now, here's where you'll see the list of different returns that you might be working on and a bunch of different information based on whatever columns you have enabled on this page. This could be a very powerful way to understand what's going on with all the different tax returns without having to open each one individually. So that's the Clients tab. Then we move on to the Details tab, which takes you inside a particular tax return. And here's where you can populate all sorts of information about a particular return. So for example, if you want to put in wages, you click on wages, you go in here, and there's all sorts of W-2 information. If a client has a business, you go in here and you click, let's say, Schedule C business income, and you put income and expenses and so forth. So that's where the Schedule C activity would be entered. So if you're entering information in Lacerte, you're probably working in the Detail tab where the vast majority of the info is going to be inputted into the software. So moving along from there, you move on to the Forms tab. And sometimes the zoom on this can get a little wonky, but you can always adjust it here at the top right. So here's where you'll see the actual return. The way Lacerte works basically is that once you enter information on the Detail tab, you then would switch over to the Forms tab to see what impact your inputs had on the tax return. With that said, you might say, well, I have to keep switching back and forth. That's kind of a pain. Well, Lacerte kind of addressed this, and I'm going to touch on that later because you can get both views up simultaneously, so you don't have to keep switching back and forth if that works better for you. We'll come back to that. Then we have the Diagnostics tab. So this tab is going to tell you basically everything that's wrong with your tax return. So this is quite a humbling experience most of the time because you might think you have the most awesome return once you're looking at the Forms tab, and then you get to the Diagnostics tab, and basically Lacerte's telling you, congratulations, you're an idiot. So this is where you are taken back to reality and understanding that you may have missed a few things that need to be addressed. So with that said, the Analysis tab is a separate feature that's a premium product that's not really included with the product when you just buy Lacerte itself, so we're going to pretty much skip it at this point. And the same thing with the Trial Balance tab. It's not really going to be applicable for this review. E-signature dashboard is something we're going to come back to as well when we talk about the e-signature functionality for the e-file signature forms. Now, Lacerte has some built-in functionality that's very nice, and here's where you'll access the dashboard for that. So it's going to summarize all of the e-file signature requests that you've sent out to clients in a very convenient view. So we'll touch on that a little bit later. But that's the general layout of Lacerte. So if you're working with the tabs, that's one way to get around. If you're in the Forms tab, you can also choose these tabs down here to get to specific pages in the tax return. Similarly, you have even more navigation on the Forms tab here, meaning that you can go from form to form that are actually included in the tax return, the forms that are part of the particular return that you're working on, or you can click Show All and really get a wide range of different forms. Now, The ones that are included with the return, they're highlighted in bold. So for example, there's Schedule 1 because it has figures on it, but there's also other schedules. Now, just because they aren't highlighted doesn't mean that they're not being calculated in the background. So if you just wanted to take a peek at a form that may not be included with the return, it would still be calculated and ready for you to analyze if you needed to do so. So with that said, those are the tabs in Lacerte, and that's the basic navigation that you have available to you when you're getting around the program. So with that spectacular tour out of the way, let's get into the advantages of the software, which are reasons that I really like using it in my own practice. So the first one is the main screen. This screen is exceptionally customizable, meaning you can change the display columns here just by right-clicking that and include all sorts of information. I mean, it's kind of unbelievable how many things they have available here, how many data points you can include on that main screen. So you can choose about as many as you can fit on the screen. Obviously, you can't have all the information up there, but the things that really matter for your practice, you can definitely have available, and you can sort by this information as well. Now, the way that the sort functionality works is not ideal. You would think that you'd just be able to click on the column headers to sort like you would many other programs, but it's really not the case. So for example, if you wanted to sort by client number, you'd have to drag this client column all the way to the left, and then you're sorting by client number. So similarly, if you wanted to sort by, let's say, the full name or by last name, you would have to drag that column all the way to the left. So essentially, it sorts by the leftmost column only, and I wish that there was a little bit more functionality in terms of the sorting of the actual returns. But I will say that when you have the correct columns selected, this screen is very helpful in understanding from a 30,000-foot view what's going on with each particular return. Particularly helpful is the e-file status for the federal returns and the state returns. So if you file a return and there's an issue, meaning that, let's say, the state return was rejected, it's good to know that so that you can address that in a timely manner. So that's definitely something that I like about the software, is this main screen, the fact that it's so customizable and you can include so much valuable information on there that you can access at a glance. So another thing that I like about Lacerte is the quick and snappy interface. And what I mean there is, I could go into return just that quickly. I can access all the different pages, jump around, enter information, go to the Forms tab. And again, it's doing this zoom thing on me, but you can go scroll through the return, go access the different parts of it. It's not really taking a lot of time to calculate. It's not really being bogged down. It is pretty quick when you move from one area of the software to the other. And that's why it contributes to a smooth workflow. You're not really waiting for the software to do its thing. Once you enter your information, you can access it on the return pretty much immediately, so there's no delay that you have to contend with. Another thing I like about Lacerte is the fact that you can scroll through the whole return very easily. So if you go to the Forms tab, you go to the 1040, you're looking at page 1, and then you're scrolling through there. Then there's a Schedule 1, and again, I'm just using the scroll wheel on my mouse to go from one page to the other, and you can see over here that it is scrolling through the return as I go from page to page. Now, this is unique. Believe it or not, I have dealt with software packages that do not allow you to go from form to form this easily. You actually have to click, next, 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 and back. They have a, specific button that you need to use to go from one form to the other, which I never understood. I mean, just let people scroll through the tax returns. Such a basic thing, but some of the other software packages that I've tried don't let you go through it as easily. Now, there is a little bit of a delay that you have to contend with going from form to form. You have to kind of stop and then scroll, stop and then scroll. But I'd much rather take that over having to move my mouse all the way to the other side of the screen to go from form to form. You should be able to scroll through the return smoothly and easily, and Lacerte allows you to do that. Now you might be thinking it would be great to see the Detail tab and the Forms tab at the same time so you could see the tax return being updated as you enter new information in the Details area. Is that possible? The answer is yes. So the way you do that is you go to a particular tax return, you go to View, Detail/Forms View, and go to Pop Out Form Screen. So now you see you have a free flowing window that you could put on a separate monitor, or you could split your screen and view it that way. So let me just show you an example here. So if we put that on this half, put that on this half, you could see that we could see the tax return itself here and also use the details screen at the same time. So let's just enter some interest income, and you will see that as soon as I press enter here, that the tax return is going to update in real time. So let's try it out. Bam, right there. So As you're entering information on the details area, you can have a separate monitor that's showing you the tax return being updated in real time. Now, there is a downside to this screen that I noticed. One of the pros of Lacerte that I noted way early in this video is that you can scroll through the return pretty easily using the scroll wheel on the mouse. In this window, for some reason that's not possible, or I don't know how to do it. Basically, you click in here, and when you're scrolling with the mouse, all that's doing is scrolling this view here, which is totally useless. So if I want to go to Schedule 1 and scroll back up to the 1040, you can't do it. If I want to go to Schedule 4, scroll back up to Schedule 1, you can't do it. Or I don't know of a way to. I know that you can use these tabs down here, but the scrolling functionality that I actually pointed out was a pro is not available in this freestanding Forms screen. Instead, you need to be in the main Forms tab, and again, the zoom functionality drives me nuts. Once you're here, you can get that scrolling functionality back to where you're using the scroll wheel and you're going from one form to the other, and it's not just scrolling the selection over here. So with that said, it's good to have that pop-out screen. It would be great if it maintained the functionality of the full-on Forms tab. Given the fact that there are some limitations associated with it, I basically end up going back and forth from one tab to the other to enter information and then see the effect of that information on the return. Another positive aspect of Lacerte has to do with the fact that the calculations are automatic. So what do I mean by that? Let's say we're working on Schedule C over here. There's $100,000 in income, but we forgot to put in $50,000 in expenses. So let's put them in there. So let's go to the Schedule C. We're there. And now let's say accounting fees. They have an egregious accountant who charges unconscionable fees. But we look at the Schedule C and boom, there it is. We didn't have to click a calculate button. We didn't have to click a process button. Believe it or not, some software packages out there make you enter the number in the return, then click a calculate button before you can see the return being impacted, which I never understood. So I like the fact that Lacerte allows you to automatically do the calculations. And you can kind of see at the bottom sometimes, it shows the status when you're entering new information. Right down here, it's calculating as you go. And it's pretty quick. Pretty immediate. It's almost not even noticeable, the delay. So that being the case, you can switch back and forth between the Details tab and the Forms tab really easily. It's really quick, and that's another thing I like about Lacerte. Another benefit that I really like about Lacerte is called Jump to Input. So if you're on the Forms tab and you're looking at the tax return and you want to find out where a particular number comes from the Details tab, the easiest way to do that is actually to find the number on the return, right-click it, and click Jump to Input. What that's going to do is bring up a menu of exactly where that number could have been input on the Detail tab. Now here you're seeing that the $50,000 was entered as the accounting expense for this Schedule C business. So it takes us directly to that input. So you're not having to guess where particular numbers come from on the tax return. For the most part, you're able to right-click it, go to Jump to Input, and it'll take you exactly to where that amount was put into the Details tab. So it doesn't work for all the amounts. Looking at this $100,000, if we right-click that, it'll tell you Jump to Input is not available on this field. So some inputs it doesn't work for. The vast majority of them, it does work extremely well for. So if you want to determine where a particular input was made on the Detail tab, that's a great way to do it. And the Jump to Input function has saved me countless number of hours, because if you're looking at a complex return and you want to nail down exactly where a particular number comes from, Jump to Input will take you right there and save you a whole lot of hassles. The next thing that I like about Lacerte has to do with demo returns. And what I mean by that is that when you are working with Lacerte on a per return basis, meaning they're charging you for each return that you activate in the software, it can be an issue, because if you say, well, I want to generate a return as a projection, not as a real return that I'm filing, how do I do that without getting charged? Well, it's pretty simple. You essentially create a new client, then you enter all nines as the either social security number or EIN if it's a business. If you do that, essentially that allows you to work with the return just as if it was a full-on client, but it's not going to charge you the rep fee. So essentially it's going to be a free demo return that you can create and play with, and it's really helpful when you're doing projections for a client. If you've completed their return, what you can do is go ahead and make a copy of their return, change the social security or EIN to all nines, and that's going to allow you to work on that return for free if you want to play around with some of the numbers and make some projections and so forth. So I know some software packages out there allow you to actually make the projections and make changes to the return within the same client file. but Lacerte gives you the functionality to create demo returns, and that has been very helpful over the years that I've used the software. Now, this next functionality is helpful when you're all done with the tax return. It's filed, it's out the door, it's out of your mind, you've forgotten about it forever, and in this case, it's really helpful to go ahead and lock the return. So basically, that's going to add this lock right here, and essentially what you're telling the program is, hey, I want these numbers in this return to stay exactly the same, even if the software goes through updates, even if someone inadvertently clicks into it, they're going to get a warning that says, hey, this client is locked. You shouldn't be changing any of the numbers in here. So this is going to ensure that the return that you have in your software is exactly the same as the return that was filed. Even if a software update comes out later on that adjusts the total tax due by a few bucks, or adjust AGI by a few bucks. If that's the case, your return still stays static. So if you ever need to amend it or anything of that nature, you can make sure that your return is the exact same one that was filed with the IRS, at least the original one. And when you try to open a locked return, so when you try to unlock this return, it's going to present you with an option to make a copy of the locked return. So again, it's trying to preserve the integrity of the return that was filed originally, and I think that's very helpful because once you file a return, you don't want any changes being made to it. So if you have to amend it in the future, you'd be able to just open that same file and work on it instead of trying to match up what was filed versus what you have in your software. So the ability to lock a return is very helpful, and it's a feature that I like a lot. Another awesome aspect about Lacerte has to do with the Diagnostics tab. So as I mentioned, this is kind of a humbling place in the software because you may think your return is terrific, that it's great, that it's awesome. While you get to the Diagnostics tab, you're going to see that there are some issues typically that you need to address. Now, the beauty of this is that once you have Diagnostics here, you can click them and go directly to where the issue lies. So if, for example, we look at the taxpayer's occupation is missing, instead of having to dig around through the detail tab to get to that input, we simply click it and it takes us right there so we can start typing right in that field. Now, similarly, it doesn't work for all the diagnostics, but it works with a good amount of them. So, for example, city of residence must be at least 3 characters. So boom, you click it, and it takes you right there to the address area of the detail tab. Now, similarly, if there's Schedule C says principal business profession is missing, you click it, and it already puts your cursor into that field. So typically, it takes you directly to the issue at hand, which makes it very efficient to address diagnostics as you go through the return to finalize it before you actually file. The other helpful thing is that the Diagnostics tab here is split into critical diagnostics and informational diagnostics. So the critical ones are actually going to prevent your return from being electronically filed in many cases because it's going to say that you need to address these items to avoid the risk of that return being rejected. So once you've cleared all the critical diagnostics, it's always helpful to look through these informational ones because they're very detailed, they're very specific, and they've been super helpful in ensuring the return that you're filing is set and all good and that you've tied up all the loose ends. I'll be honest, there's times where this has saved my butt because after multiple hours of looking at a particular return, after working for 16 hours straight, sometimes your mind isn't as sharp as it could be, and the Diagnostics tab will save you a whole lot of headaches, will definitely come in handy once you're finalizing returns and trying to make sure that they're as good as they can be. And basically, if you have issues with your returns, for the most part, if Lacerte catches it in the diagnostics, it's going to be something that needs to be addressed. There aren't too many diagnostics that come up that are just kind of useless. A lot of them are extremely important and need to be addressed before the returns are filed. So it's very helpful. It's very detailed. It's a very robust system. I've seen some other softwares that will let you file whatever and not give you a single warning. And I think that's extremely dangerous because if you miss a checkbox here or there, that can have a huge tax implication. So this software brings a lot of issues to your attention that otherwise you might miss. So the Diagnostics tab, absolutely huge. I love how robust they are, how much detail there is and so forth. And it's a big plus in my view of the Lacerte tax software. So the next awesome feature about Lacerte has to do with the client letter and the tax reform impact summary. So if you look at the forms, basically the software itself prepares a lot of documents that can be read by your clients to help them understand what's actually going on with the tax return. And I find that Lacerte has a robust set of forms in that respect that really clarify things for clients. So one of these aspects is the letter. So if you look here, you'll see that it says, dear client, enclosed is your tax return. There's the balance due. It tells them if they need to mail a check. It tells them if it's going to be automatically withdrawn from their bank account or if the refund is going to be direct debited into their account. And says under the Affordable Care Act, you are covered, so there's no penalty associated with that. And then if there's estimated payments to be made, they're outlined right there. It makes it very easy for clients to understand what to do with their tax package once they see this letter. And as you work through the return and as you make changes on the detail tab, those changes are reflected in this letter. And I've had clients literally reach out to me and tell me how thrilled they are at the level of detail in this letter. Little do they know I had no part in writing it. Lacerte did it. So don't tell them. That being the case, the letter is really helpful. And a lot of clients have questions about the changes that they're faced with due to the tax reform. So what this summary does is really compares their 2017 tax year to, in this case, 2018, and really says, okay, here are the differences from year to year, and here's the impact that tax reform has had, which saves so much time in terms of explaining to clients why their refund may not be as large as they thought or why they might owe more tax or less tax. This really helps break it down. I mean, just as an example, standard deduction here in 2017 for single filing status was $6,350. That was increased to $12,000 in 2018. So essentially, this outlines a lot of the details behind the changes due to the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, and this saves a tremendous amount of time in terms of reconciling in the client's mind why their return looks different than it did before the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was enacted. So really helpful, huge time savers. I especially like the letter. I think it presents the information in a very clear manner. It also helps you catch errors that you may have made with the return. So for example, if you see this here, meaning the instructions for the client to make their estimated payments, and they wanted electronic estimated payments, you know immediately that that needs to be adjusted so that this letter will say to the client, hey, by the way, your estimated payments are going to be made electronically, automatically, so you don't have to worry about actually writing checks and dropping them in the mail. So the letter and the tax reform impact summary, I think, are huge benefits of Lacerte. One big benefit of Lacerte is that it takes into account the basis limitation, the at-risk limitation, and also passive loss limitations, and tracks those different amounts for every single pass-through K1 that a particular client has. So that's huge because in some years they may have a loss coming through on the K1 that they can't deduct because they either don't have basis or they don't have at-risk or what have you. And Lacerte tracks all of that from year to year. And as your at-risk increases or as your basis increases, it will typically free up all of those suspended losses to be deducted on a future tax year. With that said, it's really important to make sure that those are tracked from year to year. And I've seen so many clients come over with returns that from prior tax years where the basis and the at-risk and the passive loss limits were not enforced. So essentially, they were deducting losses that they shouldn't have been. So Lacerte has really robust features in this respect, and if you enter all of the information here as necessary, it will prevent losses from being deducted if they don't meet one of these thresholds. So it's really important to track this stuff because otherwise you may end up deducting losses in the wrong tax years. So the fact that Lacerte does this for you is a really important feature and I think is a huge benefit of the software. Another aspect that I really like about Lacerte has to do with the ability to track the e-file status of any particular return and also to see what changes were made to the return by which user on which dates. So that's a bit of an audit log, if you will, to show you when a particular return had any new information entered in it or had information within it altered. So to get the e-file status, you simply click on this button right here, and there's not going to be any status on this client because it's just a sample client, but typically you'll see when the return was electronically filed, what the status is, if it was accepted, and so forth, and it does so for the federal side and the state side. So it's really helpful in making sure that the returns that you actually electronically filed were accepted and you're all set in that regard. That's the e-file status. We also have the audit log that I mentioned, right? So if you go to client log here, you'll see when changes were made, and who made the changes. So this is really important. If you have multiple people touching a return, the question is, when was this last edited and who touched it last? It's very clear here to see what the dates, times, and the usernames are that were involved in this return. So if you need to track somebody down over an amount that you found in the return and crack some heads, address a coaching opportunity, this screen is going to allow you to do that. So the ability is to easily track the e-file statuses and also the activity logs for each particular return, I think, are also really significant benefits of Lacerte. Another benefit of Lacerte has to do with the ability to import and export depreciation schedule assets. Now, what I mean by that is if you go over to the deductions header, hit the depreciation button, you're essentially taken to the list of assets that a client might have that they use for business purposes, for Schedule C, for example. So depending on the client, this could have hundreds of assets. And the question is, what if they contribute some of those assets to a partnership? Or what if they contribute some of those assets to an S corporation? How do you move them out of the individual return to the entity return so that they can be depreciated accordingly? Now, this can be a huge pain, and sometimes CPAs have had to resort to creating spreadsheets and painstakingly copying items one by one from the tax software to the spreadsheet into the new software. It's a disaster. So Lacerte makes it really easy. If you go to the Client tab, you hit Export, and you go to Export Depreciation to File, it's essentially going to take the description, the category, the depreciation method, cost basis, and so forth, and take all that information, dump it out into an Excel file, which you can then import once you're working on the return for the S corporation or the partnership or what have you. And the way you do that is you simply click Fixed Asset Import, and it's going to take you to a screen that says, hey, is this Schedule C, Schedule E, and so forth. It's asking that because we're in the individual area of Lacerte right now, dealing with individual taxes. But if this was the S corporation or a partnership, it would just as easily allow you to import those fixed assets. So this screen will allow you to essentially get those assets into the corporate return or the partnership return to continue the depreciation from there. So this could save countless hours of input in terms of getting assets from one client return to the other. So the ability to export and import the depreciation asset information is a huge benefit of Lacerte, and it's something that has literally saved countless hours. All right, now let's talk about another positive attribute of Lacerte, and that has to do with missing data markers. What do I mean by that? So let's say we're in the Detail tab and we're entering a bunch of information. So let's say we're talking about wages here. So we'll say that we're missing a W-2. We can simply right-click on any field and click Missing Data. And what that's going to do is create a red outline here. And this is going to basically signal that, hey, you got to enter information here that is going to be necessary to complete a return. Now, once you do this, the great thing is that since Lacerte has so many different input fields and so forth, it's very easy to get lost and even forget that these are there. But when you go to the Diagnostics tab that I've talked about already, you'll see that it tells you that there's missing data. Now, even a step further is if you click on that diagnostic, Lacerte outlines all of the headings of the missing information and creates basically an email that's ready to send to clients requesting all of that missing data. I mean, they were thinking when they came up with this. Now, to be perfectly honest, I don't myself use this particular email method to communicate with clients. I think it's a little bit too technical. I like to explain things in plain English whenever possible, so it's a lot easier for clients to understand what information they need to send. But in this case, the ability to mark fields as missing information and just have them displayed here is really helpful because, for example, if you say, oh, I got this federal income tax withheld, I got the W-2, I'm ready to input, you just click it and it takes you directly to the input and puts your cursor right in the box. So that's huge in terms of making sure that if there's some information that on the cuff you just realize that you don't have yet, you simply mark it as missing data, and then you have the diagnostic to remind you later on to contact the client and get that info. Now, the other thing that Lacerte does is if you, let's say, enter an amount in here, and then you exit out of that particular field, it's going to ask you if you want to clear the missing data tag. So that's really helpful as well, because if you're just putting a number there as a projection, you want to click no so that you still remember to come back to it and enter the actual value. So the good thing is with the missing data tabs, you can actually have data in there, but that's basically going to serve as a reminder to go ahead and update that later on because those aren't the final numbers. So missing data tags, huge plus. So here's another thing that I like about Lacerte. Let's say you're working on an entity return. Let's say it's a S corporation or partnership and so forth, and you are preparing the return for the pass-through entity and the client themselves. The question is, how can you get the K1 information over to the personal return? Do you have to enter it manually? How does that work? Lacerte makes this really easy. So if you go into the S corporation return, you essentially can go to the K1 area and click on this link right here. And there's an option to export shareholder data. So essentially, at the S corporation level in this example, what's going to happen is each one of the shareholder clients that you have at the individual level is going to automatically export, if you so choose, that information to each one of their individual returns. Now, on the federal level, this works pretty smoothly. On the state returns, though, you do have to watch out sometimes because the flow through from the entity return to the individual state returns may not be as smooth. I know that's not supported for all states. You have to double check the numbers. And I still double check the numbers with the federal return because you always want to be sure that the K1 is being reflected correctly on the personal returns. But the fact that that's there is one less step that you have to take in terms of entering the data, but I would still always double check that the federal K1 amounts are correct, that they flowed through correctly, and also the state amounts especially you need to check because depending on the states that you're working with, those amounts may not come through. But it does save some time in terms of entering the K1 data, at least at the federal level, and that's another feature that I like about the software. Are you tired of hearing about benefits yet? Of course you're not. So let's talk about the e-signature functionality of Lacerte. And I'm going to show that to you by taking a look at the form section. Now, this might be an issue that they need to address too. I've adjusted this multiple times during this video and it still zooms all wonky. But anyway, if you are ready to file a return and you're about to send the signature forms to the client, we all know how this process works out, right? You send the client 2 pages to sign, they send you back 1 page, right? You send them 4 pages to sign, they send you back 2 pages. You send them back 1 page to sign, they send you back a signed page, but it's the wrong one, right? We've all been through this, correct? So in this software, you essentially can send them in this case, 8879, to be signed electronically. And this is sent through a DocuSign. It's knowledge-based authentication, so it meets the requirements for the IRS. They're happy. The states, for the most part, are happy with this. So instead of printing out the forms and sending it to the client or sending them a PDF, which you know they're going to sign incorrectly and send you back, upside down signatures, missing the date, and so forth, it's really convenient to go ahead and just send them the e-signature. And the way that you do that is you simply go here in the e-file menu, you go to Intuit e-signature, and then you go to request e-signature. So that's going to essentially create an email that goes out to your clients to allow them to sign returns electronically. And it's a really smooth process. They charge, if you purchase these e-signatures one by one, I think it's $2.99 per client, which I think is a tremendous savings in terms of the alternative being going back and forth and asking, well, please sign both pages that we sent you, or please sign all 4 pages or 3 pages, or what have you. And this has been a tremendous time saver for me. I think the $2.99 price tag is super worth it. And if you want a larger amounts of e-signatures to purchase, it allows you to do that as well. So you can get that price down per return ever so slightly to save a few bucks here and there. But I think that the e-signature functionality being built into Lacerte and the fact that you can track the status of each particular e-signature here on the e-signature dashboard are huge benefits, huge time savers. I really like these parts about Lacerte, and they've enabled me to make that final process of getting a return out the door that much smoother and less stressful. Now, another aspect that I really like about Lacerte has to do with the tax organizer. Now, this is every client's favorite document, and essentially it includes all of their tax information from the prior year and allows them to confirm that that information is still applicable if it's their, let's say, name, address, phone number, and so forth. But on top of that, it also has whatever Schedule C income they had in the prior year, whatever they had in terms of W-2 wages, interest, and so forth. So it allows them to essentially take into account the prior year amounts and also input the current year amounts right next to them. So it's really helpful because it's a good reminder for them to say, hey, you had these 5 savings accounts last year. Are they still all applicable for this year? And they could essentially mark it up as a PDF, or they can print it out and write on it. And now I will touch on the fact that Lacerte also has an e-organizer, but unfortunately that product is total garbage, and we will get into that in further detail. But the fact that Lacerte has a pretty comprehensive organizer functionality has been helpful for a lot of my clients in terms of getting all of their records in order and using that as a jumping off point to start gathering their tax information for a particular tax year. So the fact that it's included for you, it's including the prior year information, and it's pretty robust in the fact that it's easy to use, it's comprehensive, and it has pages for just about any sort of information you could think of. That being the case is a huge plus, especially when they're new clients and they're just coming on board. I like to send them pretty much a full organizer so we can try to catch any aspects that may be applicable and are floating around out there that aren't reflected on a prior year return. So really good feature. It's a huge plus of Lacerte. Now, unfortunately, and Lacerte really needs to get their act together on this, the PDFs that are generated for the organizers are not fillable, meaning they don't have fields that you could just click on in the PDF file and enter information. You actually need a PDF editor to put text on top of the organizer, which is not ideal. Ideally, clients would be able to simply type in the organizer in a basic PDF reader and save the file that way or print it out that way. Unfortunately, that's not the case, and so far it doesn't look like Lacerte is moving in that direction. But we're still talking about the pros, the advantages and so forth. I will touch on the fact that there are downsides to this organizer, but I think the fact that it's included with the software and it works pretty easily is a huge plus. Now, another huge plus associated with the software has to do with the ability to override particular fields in the software. So pretty much any amount that you see on the return, you're able to enter a different value for that amount. So if you come up with a calculation that's different than the Lacerte calculation, you can go ahead and enter your value here on the detail tab and override a lot of the fields that are shown on the tax returns themselves. And the way that looks is the following. So if you see this O in brackets, that means you can override a particular amount. So if you put a value in here, that's going to replace typically the amount that's shown on the return. Similarly, when you have an A in the brackets, that allows you to adjust a particular amount. So if the return is showing 100,000 and you want to show 150,000, typically you could throw in a number here and that's going to adjust that value on the tax return. Now, the one thing that I've learned in my experience with Lacerte is that if you're overriding, it's probably wrong. For the most part, you have to be very careful when you override and extremely confident that you are making the correct adjustment, because there have been so many times that I've seen that amounts have been overridden when they should have been just left alone because the tax software is doing it correctly. So you have to be extremely careful. This is a power that needs to be used within boundaries, because you can definitely screw something up very significantly by going overboard with the override. So ideally, I like to avoid them altogether, but in some situations, you do need to replace amounts for whatever reason on the return, and the ability to override easily is pretty huge. So I like that, and also the ability to adjust certain values is also good. On top of that, the fact that there are these labels on all these different input fields also makes it very clear if you're just entering an amount, or you're adjusting a tax return amount, or you're overriding an amount. So it's very important to understand how your inputs are affecting the return, and that's why I think the labeling that they have here is also really helpful. So the ability to override and adjust tax return values is also a huge plus of the software. So to wrap up the benefits and put a cap on all of these advantages, I'm going to talk about probably the most controversial benefit that I feel that Lacerte has, and that's the price. I know. Hold your tomatoes for a second. Just hear me out. So on the Lacerte website, you see the price here. So if you are paying per return, which I'm currently using this model right now, they're going to charge you for your first year $389 just to get started. So that's basically the price to get the software. Now, on top of that, here are the fees that you'll pay per return. So a 1040 federal, one state, you're looking at $76. Any additional states, you're looking at $47 to add to that. Any business returns that are federal, one state, you're looking at $99. And it could be argued that there's a lot of cheaper software packages out there, and there certainly are. I mean, there's packages where you can file returns for $20, $30, what have you. But for me, my assessment is that I think it's worth it for Lacerte for what you get. Now, specifically the ease of use, the fact that once you know how to input a particular amount, you can pretty much fly there immediately, see the return being updated in real time, and not have to deal with too many hassles on that end. the fact that the diagnostics are so robust and they're so detailed and they catch a lot of different things that you may not have thought of had you not seen the diagnostic on that particular matter. So I'm a big fan of diagnostics, and Lacerte pretty much takes a lot of the stress out of the tax preparation process, because I know that if there's anything significantly off with the return, there's probably a diagnostic that'll catch it. Now, obviously, you have to do your due diligence. You can't just do this blindly. So obviously, you need to pay attention when you're doing a return, make sure it's correct. But there are going to be some things where you just don't enter, a client's address or zip code or something like that, or you miss a particular detail, or you can't e-file a certain return. And diagnostics have been extremely helpful in that regard. So the peace of mind that Lacerte gives me is well worth the price, in my opinion. Now, would I love it to be cheaper? I mean, of course, but at the end of the day, I don't feel like I'm being robbed when I use this software, even with these prices. Now, if you have a higher volume of returns that you do, I'm sure you can get a better value, and you don't even have to use the paper return functionality. You could just work out a price with Intuit. But with the model that I use and the cost involved and so forth, for me it's reasonable. But I know a lot of people would disagree on this. But my personal view is it's worth it. I continue to use it, and I don't see myself making a jump in the immediate future. But with that said, there's certainly disadvantages that we're going to cover right now.